Good morning, buenos dias, bom dia. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Luiz Eugênio Mello, and I am the Scientific Director of FAPESP, the São Paulo Research Foundation in São Paulo, Brazil. I would like to welcome you to the first America's Regional Scientific Webinar on COVID-19, sponsored by the Global Research Council, the GRC, and organized by UNID from Chile, CONICET from Paraguay, CONICET from Argentina, FAPESP from Brazil, and UNCIRC from Canada. This will be a short series of webinars touching on 3 different topics of key importance during the COVID-19 pandemic. This first seminar will focus on health systems. The next 2 seminars on research infrastructure and on education will take place also in virtual form on November 10th and 11th at the same time. I invite you to attend these future seminars as well. From December 9 through 11th last year, CONICET, and FAPESP organized the GRC Americas Region COVID-19 Virtual Seminar. That 3-day seminar addressed the Americas' response to COVID-19, mainly from the perspective of funding agencies' policy initiatives and management. After that seminar, the agencies that are organizing the present event gathered to examine the possibility of creating a seminar series more focused on the activity of researchers involved with the many aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. These seminars are the outcome of those conversations. Officials of the World Health Organization have often observed that the response of the research funding agencies to the COVID-19 pandemic was not sufficiently coordinated and timely. This points to a need to establish stronger links among the funding agencies and among the research communities they work with, and to improve mechanisms and initiatives for collaboration in all regions. The Global Research Council is committed to building stronger and more effective collaboration mechanisms among its participating agencies. There are many challenges specific to the funding agencies in the Americas that go beyond the COVID pandemic. On top of that, there are also global challenges, as clearly delineated by the 17 UN Sustainable Goals that must be faced by all countries in the world. This interplay between regional and global needs, which goes beyond the present COVID-19 crisis, is part of the discussions this seminar will like to instigate. From the Global Research Council perspective, equity, diversity, and inclusion within the international research community are fundamental values to be pursued and implemented. Besides creating a forum for scientists to elaborate on their research experience, in this seminar, we would like to hear the experiences from the many researchers attending regarding gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in its various aspects. In the present seminar, well-recognized specialists acting in 8 different countries in the Americas region from north to south will present their contributions. I am sure we will have a very exciting and productive seminar. Prior to giving the floor to the speakers, I will make a short presentation about the Global Research Council, describing its objectives, vision, and initiatives. Let me share my screen here. So what's the GRC? The Global Research Council was established in 2012, and it is a virtual organization comprised of the heads of science and engineering funding agencies from around the world, dedicated to promote the sharing of data and best practices for high-quality collaboration among funding agencies worldwide. Our collective vision is that research and innovation play a leading role in providing the solutions that society needs to overcome the global and interconnected challenges of our time. Our mission is to work in partnership to create the conditions in which international research cooperation and collaboration can thrive. By doing so, we enable researchers to develop international partnerships to deliver excellent research which impacts positively on the lives and well-being of citizens of across the globe. The objectives of the GRC are to act as a forum for funding agencies to share data and best practice and discuss issues of common concern and mutual strategic priority, to actively facilitate and promote bilateral and multilateral collaboration between our participant organizations to support the global science enterprise and address global grand challenges, to champion a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive future to harness the global diversity of talent, and to maximize the value and trust placed in science by society by sharing experience and best practice in engaging and communicating with society and the public. To engage and demonstrate the value of the GRC to a wide range of our key stakeholders, particularly through our regional meetings and dialogues such as this, to increase the visibility of the GRC and its work to our participant organizations and wider stakeholders, and work in partnership with those actors to maximize the value and impact of the GRC's work, to support organizations looking to take forward GRC statements of principles and learnings, and continue to be a resource for those wishing to build a world-class research ecosystem. Each year, we host the GRC's annual meeting. Next one will be in Panama next year, to bring together our participants to discuss topics of mutual interest. As part of these meetings, we also adopt a number of statements and standards developed with our participants throughout the year, as well as to endorse recommendations for follow-up activities. Our regional meetings, such as this, also provide an opportunity each year for wider GRC participants to engage with our activities and to have input to the development of our initiatives. As part of our events and activities, GRC participants discuss and feed into the development of topics of pertinence and mutual strategic interest. For many of these topics, statements of principles are then co-developed between our participants and endorsed as part of our annual meetings. Recent GRC discussions and topics include the dynamic interplay between fundamental research and innovation building capacity and connectivity amongst granting agencies worldwide. This was in 2017. Science diplomacy, peer and merit review in 2018. Expectations of societal and economic impact in 2019. And finally, in 2020 and 2021, public engagement and mission-oriented research. All of our SOPs and a range of other GRC outputs can be found on the GRC website. Other activities and initiatives, the GRC operates a number of thematic working groups between GRC participants based on the needs and interests of our participant organizations. Our working groups include partnered research programs, gender, responsible research assessment. We also provide a framework for other initiatives and activities to strengthen cooperation and knowledge exchange among our participants. Recent initiatives include responsible research assessment, regional seminar series on COVID-19, and science diplomacy workshop. This is the list of our upcoming meetings for 2021 and 2022. I would like to highlight the last event, which is the May 30th to June 3rd, the 10th annual meeting of the GRC, which will be hosted by Senacit from Panama and co-hosted by the National Science Foundation from the United States in Panama City. And I invite all of you to participate and to take place on all of those activities. So with that, I conclude my presentations and would like now to introduce our first speaker, which is Professor André Brunoni. He's an associate professor of the University of São Paulo at its medical school. André, the floor is yours. E você está no mudo, André.
Sorry. Now I'm on mute. So thank you, Professor Mello, for inviting me here. Thank you for Professor Euclides as well. And I would like to show some of our research that we have done in the past 2 years regarding COVID. And I am a psychiatrist, so we decided to study the mental health in Brazil during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic had several restrictive measures. It started in almost 1 year ago and has changed dramatically the way we live due to travel restrictions, use of masks, school closures, quarantine, close of business and employment, and closure of borders. And because of that, it was imagined or expected that there would be a great surge in mental disorders worldwide. We decided to investigate that in the ELSA-Brasil study, which is the Brazilian longitudinal study of health. It's the largest cohort in Brazil. It started in 2008, and it involves 15,000 participants from 6 institutions, from the University of São Paulo and the Federal Universities of Minas Gerais, Bahia, Espírito Santo, Rio Grande do Sul, and Fundação Oswaldo Cruz from Rio de Janeiro. We had the lockdown in São Paulo in March 15, 2020. We happily organized ourselves to do several virtual assessments of these participants. It's important to remember that our cohort has always collected data on site, so it was the first time that we were doing online assessments. And for doing that, we had the support and sponsor of FAPESP that rapidly approved emergency grant for research regarding COVID. This is the first paper that we published regarding our data. And basically, the importance of doing cohort studies is that we can see and evaluate people not only during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic. So we can have really an idea of what's going on with these participants. Therefore, we have data from 2008 to 10, also data from 2012 to 2014, also before the pandemic in 2017 to 19, and data during the pandemic in 2020. And also in 2020, we were able to collect 3 assessments, all online assessments in May, June, July, September, October, December, and now we have new data that was collected in 2021, in April, June. So basically, this is our flow chart. It's important to show that we were able to collect only data from half of our sample. It was difficult to assess some of the participants because they agreed to participate, but they did not answer the questionnaires, or they did not have access to online tools, smartphones, or low levels of digital literacy. But we were able to collect data of approximately half of the sample. And interestingly, in ELSA-Brasil, we found that there were no changes in the prevalence of mental disorders. So we found that the common mental disorders levels were high before the pandemic, around the 25% of the sample, but remained high during the pandemic as well in 2020. This is, of course, one way to analyze the data. We can also think differently and try to explore the trajectories of depressive symptoms or of common mental symptoms during the pandemic. So here are the average scores of participants during the pandemic, and based on this data, we were able to explore different trajectories of subgroups. And here we can see kind of a different scenario. So basically, we can see here that there are people in red, orange, and dark red that are presenting a decrease in symptoms over the pandemic, but we can also see that there are 2 groups here in light gray and light green and green that are increasing their symptomatology, and these groups, which correspond to groups 3 and 5, correspond to almost 50% of the sample. So we can see that the scenario regarding mental health and mental disorders are quite dynamic during the pandemic. Of course, it's interesting to explore risk factors associated with these trajectories. This can also help us to build policies and generalize our findings to Brazilian and other Latin American samples. And we found that people who were at increased risk of developing mental disorders and having worsening trajectory were those from non-white ethnicity, women, those with previous mental disorders, those who had COVID-19 symptoms, and those who had stress and income preoccupations. On the other hand, people who were associated with a decreased risk were older participants, more than 60 years old, those with university degree, those who had positive interpersonal relationships, and those who referred having good physical health. The global impact in 2020 was quite diverse. So here is just one of the several meta-analyses that were done, and we can see here a huge variability between studies. So some studies showing an increase, many studies showing no changes, and some studies showing a decrease.
I think the audio and the presentation from Professor Brunoni has been lost for all of us. Let's wait for a while and see whether he is able to come back. So he might be reconnecting. André, você reconectou. Agora é só tirar do mudo e voltar para a apresentação. So, Professor Brunoni has reconnected. Now it's just a matter of sharing the presentation again and starting from where he stopped. Professor Brunoni, can you hear us?
Professor, he is still facing a problem with connection.
So, in the interest of time, he's back.
Okay, sorry. So it's almost over, just one slide. So I was just saying that it's a complex phenomenon regarding mental disorders, but and because it's a dynamic scenario, maybe it's going to change over time. And there are many news regarding the impact in several aspects, social demographic aspects, over time. So that's all I had to say. Sorry for the interruption, the internet connectivity, and thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Brunoni. Fascinating presentation, and it's a timely issue on this topic. I would like to remember the audience to post your questions on the Q&A box that we have on the Zoom site, and we're collecting those for a discussion at the end of our presentations. I would like now to invite Professor Alexis Kalergis. He has been suggested by Anid from Chile. He's a full professor at the Schools of Biological Sciences and Medicine at the Universidad Católica de Chile. Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to this important meeting. Congratulations for the initiative. I'd like to start just reminding you about the infectious diseases. The pandemics have been with the human race for many years, and solutions that have evolved over time are different kinds, but vaccines have been very important. And for the case of the smallpox, for example, a disease was eradicated thanks to the use of vaccines. And the same is in the case in controlling diseases such as polio, measles, rubella, and mumps. Every time a vaccine is introduced in the population, after demonstrating safety and effectiveness, vaccines are efficacious. And that applies to many diseases. As the usage of vaccines go up, the disease incidence goes down. And we have in our countries, especially in Latin America, a large gap between comparing to industrialized countries in terms of vaccine access, quality, and production. And we published a paper in 2018, indicating how important it was to produce vaccines locally. And in our region, only Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Mexico are able of producing vaccines. So we initiated this year a project in collaboration with Sinovac in Chile in order to try to restore the capability in Chile to produce vaccines, something that was done up to the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, this is particularly important when you're confronting a pandemic like the one caused by SARS-CoV-2, major disease that spread up through the globe because of the lack of immunity. So vaccines are important. And we realized very early that research on vaccine was a major goal. And we started in January, February 2020, working on vaccines. We've been working on vaccines for about 20 years in Chile, and we've been using mainly the approach consistent of using recombinant BCG to vaccinate against respiratory viruses. We published a paper earlier in the pandemic showing that BCG by itself may be useful for beneficial for COVID-19 disease, as countries that have BCG programs are show better numbers during the first weeks of the outbreak. And this research led us to produce our own COVID-19 vaccine that now we are making into a GMP program to go into clinical studies. And these are the students and postdocs working on this project all along during the pandemic in Chile. That gave us some visibility. For example, I'd like to always to highlight this article in Nature saying that Latin American countries joined the coronavirus vaccine race. No one's coming to rescue us. I think that's very important to keep working on research, and the research in some countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile was highlighted in this article. And that visibility has been along for many years, and we have like formal collaborations with colleagues in the US and France. And just a few years before the pandemic, we had initiated a collaboration with China, and during the pandemic with Israel. And also, we were able to put together a consortium of universities in Chile in order to confront the pandemic by to evaluate vaccines that either produce here or in collaboration with colleagues in other places. And I will tell you today about the results we obtained in the collaboration with China, specifically with Sinovac, thanks to the scientific diplomacy that was mentioned in the introduction for this meeting. We were invited to present our results on vaccine research in Beijing in 2019, and we had the opportunity to meet many colleagues in China that we were trying to collaborate on vaccine development, specifically for the respiratory syncytial virus. But then the pandemic came, and then we just put all our effort and capacity on the collaboration on COVID-19 vaccine. And we were interested in the vaccine made by Sinovac because it is an inactivated vaccine that was initially published in Science 2020, and later clinical trials in adults and elderly were published in two very important journals in Lancet Infectious Diseases. And of course, as part of the collaboration that we established with them, we were learning about this advancement, the progress on the vaccine, and decided to go ahead and just carry together a major phase 3 trial in Chile with the connection with supply of vaccines if the results are positive. So we built together this protocol and of course got approved by the ethical committees and the regulatory agencies in our country, which is required. This happened in September 2020. And then we registered the trial in Clinical Trials of COVID. It's a very prestigious place to communicate clinical trials. And the trial involved many centers that are part of this consortium of universities and public and private hospitals, and led to data that were very important. This data were the first data obtained in terms of safety and published in terms of safety and immunogenicity of the vaccine outside of China. So the vaccine was safe. We got a very significant result in terms of immunogenicity. We were able to very precisely measure antibodies and T cells, and have already published 2 papers, and we have another 3 papers under revision with this data. So this has been able to strengthen our capacity in the country to carry out our research all the way from the basic discovery to the clinical evaluation, and most importantly, led to the connection between China and Chile, between Sinovac and the university. That was transferred, that component of vaccine supply was transferred 100% from the university to the Chilean state through the Ministry of Health, because we believe that vaccines are public health goods, and they should be treated as such and given access to everybody who needs them. So the vaccine was approved for emergency use in Chile late January 2021, based on international data, but also, most importantly, data that we obtained here in Chile, and that allowed the country to start receiving a significant amount of vaccines based on the agreement that we have established with Sinovac. And that promoted the fairly efficient vaccination process that in Chile led to results that have been, shown to be positive in terms of reducing the number of cases of COVID-19. And this is mainly due to the use of Sinovac as the main vaccine in the country. The Ministry of Health, they published a very important study showing the effectiveness of the vaccine in the real world, and those results from safety, effectiveness, and immunogenicity in real world we had previously observed in our clinical study. Now, there are some questions that we've been answering recently, the last community, that led us to recommend having additional boost doses to improve immunity. Also, whether the vaccine is able to neutralize variants. We already have data with that. We have a paper under revision and shown that the immunity is able to neutralize partially the variants, and most importantly, safety in the pediatric population, because countries that have made progress in terms of vaccinating adults have confronted the problem of increased numbers of COVID-19 cases in pediatric population. So we initiated a few months ago a phase 3 study in pediatric population, together with the approval of the vaccine in Chile for emergency use in children. So this is just to finalize this collaboration between basic research and clinical research in Chile, together with international collaboration and support of the public and private sector, have led to the trust by the citizens. We believe that's very important in order to gain vaccine confidence, is to be transparent in terms of the advances and problems, that the science confronts as part of the generation of vaccines. So I'd like to thank the team. We've been working on this with a few faculty from the university. For the pediatric study, the group is much larger because it's a bigger study. and many, and this is very important, scientists, clinicians, nurses, chemists, young students, and trainees have been part of this important work. So thank you very much for your attention, and that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you, Professor Kalergis, for a fascinating presentation. And as we are about to consider returning to normalcy, this is only an option because we have had vaccines, and we have had vaccines in an unprecedented time frame as compared to other previous pandemics that the world has faced. I would like I would like to further remember our participants to post questions on the Q&A box on this YouTube session. And now to invite Professor Sara Allin. She's an associate professor at the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto, and she has been recommended to participate on this panel by our fellow agency, NSERC. Sara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm Sara Allin with the University of Toronto, where I'm also director of the North American Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. And in my 5 minutes or so, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the NAO, the work we're doing to leverage comparative research to support evidence-informed health policy. So the NAO really was inspired by the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. The European Observatory has been around for over 20 years. The NAO was founded in 2017 and inspired by the European Observatory in the sense that they are motivated by similar goals of conducting comparative research, really closely tied and in partnership with policymakers in order to support their information needs. But the interest of the NAO is really to focus on the decentralized health systems in North America, where our focus is on the subnational health systems, that is states and provinces, in order to provide sort of a foundation for more systematic health system and policy comparisons at that sub-state level. For example, the province that I sit in, Ontario, about 15 million people, is responsible for its own health system, and it's usually more easily compared to a number of OECD countries in terms of governance and population size. And so sub-state to national comparisons might be more sensible in some cases. We're a sort of network model of center where there's an independent scholars distributed across North America who we regularly partner with in our research. The first hub of the NAO was started at University of Toronto, but we have partners who are leading their own hubs in the United States at the UCLA, led by Thomas Rice, and in Mexico, led by Miguel Gonzalez Block at the National Institute of Public Health, where he's the executive director of the Center for Health Systems Research. So we partner with them and with others in order to draw attention to the sort of opportunities for comparative research across North America. To date, we've been pretty heavily focused on Canada in order to sort of start up the center, and we have close partnerships with provincial governments and federal governments and other healthcare agencies in Canada. And we're hoping to develop further the academic hubs in the United States and Mexico in order to facilitate those close relationships with decision makers in order to conduct that policy relevant and impactful research. So briefly, I'll highlight some of the key features that make the 3 countries of North America really suitable comparators for health systems research. The one obvious one is that these are federations where subnational governments do play an important role. The health systems are different, especially concerning the way that they've sought to expand to achieve universal health coverage, each taking a very different path. But there are some significant policy similarities. one of which is the significant health disparities that are faced, disproportionately affecting poor and marginalized populations in each country. There's this common economic space with considerable population mobility. And historically, the United States has been highly influential in terms of education and training that really impacts the health workforce. And the way that the health workforce may also be mobile across the region. However, of course, there's historical and institutional differences that are fundamental and very important to consider when drawing comparisons. And some of these features in terms of that make these three countries comparable also extend to other parts of the Americas that allow us to sort of expand to other federal jurisdictions. And we have partnerships in Brazil and other parts of the world to enable that focus on federations and how the multi-level governance impacts some of the health policy challenges that we face. So we're really pleased to have published 3 health system reviews for each of the countries. This was in partnership with the European Observatory, and we also have hard copies available through the University of Toronto Press that are available in the Americas to purchase, although they're available online without any cost. These are in-depth health system descriptions and analysis that allow for that sort of foundational knowledge for each system to sort of facilitate more in-depth and sort of focused studies that leverage this, these baseline kind of products that help us understand the details of each system and then identify opportunities for comparative research. And we're also working on a series that focus on Canadian provinces. And we have 3 already published or about to be published this month on provincial health systems in Canada. And we're working towards US states and looking at the Medicaid program there. So there's opportunities to take this model further and apply it in the other countries. So I'm going to conclude with a really brief summary of some of the work that we've been focused on in collaboration with our local and international partners to advance health system research to support the ongoing response to COVID-19 and considering equity, sustainability, and resilience of health systems in the longer term. The first one is this COVID-19 Health System Response Monitor that is a joint undertaking of the WHO Regional Office for Europe, the European Commission, and the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies to really bring together information that's updated frequently, that allows for comparing across a set of domains around the COVID health systems response across countries in an interactive website. So we contribute information for Canada to allow Canada to be included, as well as posting the same types of reports with following the same template for the United States and Mexico on the NAO website. And so this allows for, again, a kind of baseline information source to see various aspects of the COVID response. We also have comparative health systems research underway that really leverages the Health Systems and Policy Monitor Network. It's a network of scholars across European region and with contributors from North America. And this work is exploring aspects of universal health coverage, progressivity in finance, and it's really made possible through this network that's been in place and supported by the European Observatory to allow us to access health system scholars and experts in other countries in order to rapidly respond to pressing research questions and to get local experts to comment on the data that we collect in their countries as well. We also recently had an opportunity to partner with the World Bank and report the compared health system responses across a selection of Latin American and Caribbean region countries, and this report is published and we can share more about that. And finally, we're starting a new project with the World Economic Forum and LSE that really aims to assess the health system in terms of sustainability and resilience. And I'm happy to take your questions on that as well. And I'll leave it at that. And I look forward to hearing the other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Allin. Fascinating presentation as well. There are a number of similarities, I would say, between the climate change that we're facing and the COVID-19 challenge. One of them being that they likely enhance the existing inequalities and make them even more visible. So I think COVID-19, by exposing whatever deficiencies our systems have, might allow for solutions to be more clearly addressed or brought into action. Thank you. Again, I would like to remind our audience that we have a Q&A session, which is waiting to be populated with your questions. Our next presentation will be by Professor Angelica Jimenez de Samudio. She was suggested by CONICET from Paraguay. She is the head of the Department of Pediatric Hemato-Oncology at the Faculty of Medical Sciences of the National University of Asunción, Paraguay. Professor Samudio. You're on mute.
Good morning for everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity of sharing our advancing research in Paraguay. I'm Leticia Ramirez, and I'm going to talk on behalf of Professor Samudio and our research group from Paraguay. Today, first of all, I'm going to present our working group, also the projects we have developed last year focused on COVID-19, also about the lessons we learned and some interest proposals for the future. This is our group. Our group is formed by more than 15 researchers all over the country. We represent the medicine school of the National University of Asunción, and also some researchers from the Ministry of Health, from the Social Security Hospital, and also from the private practice hospital. And we try to join all the kinds of hospitals and researchers from all over the country and from all the subsectors of our health system in Paraguay. To develop our research, we had to make the group bigger, and also were included some researchers from all the hospitals in our country. When the pandemic started and it was the outbreak of COVID-19, I think all the researchers from all over the world wanted to go to COVID and investigate at least some aspects. In our country, we firstly focused on health professionals, and then also COVID treatment at home and also in hospitalized patients. One of the first projects was in March last year with hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis of virus SARS-CoV-2 in health professionals. Finally, and due to the scientific evidence by that time, we discontinued this work. And then we moved with ivermectin, which is a very known drug here in Latin America. We did not know if ivermectin could have an effect in prophylaxis or even treatment. And we also wrote a proposal for health professionals. And finally, this project was also discontinued because of the evidence and also because vaccines finally arrived. Then we have this project, which is a randomized controlled trial with placebo and ivermectin, and the title was Efficacy of Intervention Strategies in Patients with Mild COVID-19. And this is the first trial randomized controlled trial controlled with placebo done in our country. And the main objective was to assess the efficacy of the intervention with ivermectin to reduce the hospitalization in patients with COVID-19 who were at home in Asunción and Central, which are the places where most population is concentrated in our country. This project finished this March 2021 with no difference between both groups. We also conducted an open label clinical trial with one arm known as the plasma convalescent COVID-19 therapy. And the main objective of this project was to evaluate the effectiveness of the plasma convalescent of patients with COVID-19 as an early treatment to reduce the mortality in patients with COVID-19 who were hospitalized with at least one risk factor of clinical deterioration. This project started last year in August 2020 and finished by December. This is an open label, single arm, multicentric, where were included patients hospitalized all over the country. And this is one also of the first projects that we did in a multicentric approach. This is also registered in the clinical trials website. This is the flow chart of the project. As we see, we worked with the blood bank from patients who recovered from COVID, who donated their plasma for the patients who were now hospitalized all over the country and were with mild, moderate, or severe COVID, but not in the ICU, and with at least one risk factor of clinical deterioration. Just to show some of our results, we had 377 patients finally enrolled with a mean age of 55 years, and most of them were from the central department where the most amount of the population is in our country. With the risk factors, the first one was hypertension, followed by obesity in 46% of the patients, and also diabetes and the age. And the risk factors and the clinical symptoms that were associated with clinical deterioration, the most common were dyspnea and cough. Most of the patients were 6 to 10 days after the onset of symptoms when they received the plasma therapy, and most of them were in moderate disease. Here we see our population. They received the plasma convalescent at this day 7 from the onset of symptoms, and the mortality was in the overall patients an estimation around 9%, and it was very low in all the patients who were not admitted in the ICU, who did not need it. It was 2%, and finally, at the 30 days after the therapy, we had around 9.8 mortality. And here we see also the comparison between our patients and the mortality in the patients who did not receive the plasma therapy, as this was an open label trial and not compared with placebo. So in the lessons that we learned is that in science, we have to be very open-minded and flexible, and that the collaborative efforts are the ones who really work. We, for the first time, worked in a really multicentric group and working in networks, usually in virtual context, and we're talking about a contagious disease and working with patients who were with COVID-19 confirmed. The most challenging thing for us was the communication, not especially with our colleagues, but with the rest of the society. It's very important to be clear, to be consistent, to give messages that are easy to understand, because everybody was with a lot of information, and sometimes it's very difficult to know what is true and what is not. And we have to build our answers very fast and based on knowledge, just to give our colleagues, our patients, especially the society, an answer, especially in these difficult times of an outbreak and epidemic. We think the answer, especially for a country where the health system is very fragmented and divided, it's very important to, even though it's very, very different from one place to other, to integrate and to give an answer to everybody. So we work really on our research lines too, as cancer registry and pediatric cancer, Gaucher disease, and other things. But last year, as everybody, we moved to COVID-19 too. And we know we have to start working also in some health attention network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jimenez de Samudio. Very interesting presentation, and it's quite timely, this discussion of topics that are often brought in by society, such as whether or not ivermectin works, and there could be a number of outcomes, and not to investigate something that society is bringing, but does not necessarily contribute to showing what's best. And this in Brazil in particular has been quite a politicized topic, given its use as a potential treatment, even though this was long after a number of studies have shown a lack of efficacy in many circumstances. I would like now to invite our other guest, which is Professor Israel Mejia. He was suggested by CONICET from Mexico. He's currently the director of the Division of Electrical Engineering at CIDESI in Mexico. Professor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this invitation. Just let me share my full screen. Thank you. My name is Israel Mejia, and I'm going to talk about what are the scientific and technological challenges that we face here in Mexico as part of this team of research centers, part of the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico, and how we needed to switch gears from what we've been doing before the pandemic and what we are doing right now after the pandemic. So this is basically CIDESI. We are a research and development center located in Mexico. We have different campuses dedicated historically to manufacturing, where we've been working with oil and gas, additive manufacturing, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, in these different topics that we normally attend for industry, but also for the government agencies like Pemex, like the subway in Mexico City. And this is what we've been doing historically for almost 35 years until the pandemic hit. So basically in 2020, when we started looking at closing the institutions and start getting very attentive to this pandemic, we faced several challenges. One of them was the lack of medical devices that could be used in the hospitals in Mexico. And there are several examples, like very sophisticated devices like the ventilators, to very basic devices to thermometers. But as you remember, when Asia and all these countries that are in charge of providing the world with technology close the borders and also close the companies, we suffer a shortage of many of these different electronics and medical devices. In countries like Mexico, we face a very difficult time trying to collect all these devices and put it into the hospital just to attend all this pandemic that we start facing in 2020. So then the CONICET group all the research centers and start asking for some solutions that we could put together in a very short amount of time, in a timeline from 3 to 6 months, going from research development and put it into a technology readiness level between 8 and 9. That means that we reach production at so many levels with these different devices. So right now, I'm going to show you just a quick example on how we did this with our devices. One particular device was a temperature sensor for corporal thermometers. As you remember, the thermometer right now is one of the one of the key instruments just to determine, not to say if one person has COVID, but just to try to prevent having one person in between many people and make this contagious group from different sources. So what we had here in CDESI was we faced basically 3 different projects. Was the ventilators, the corporal thermometers, and also a COVID-19 biosensor that we put together into the hospital just to try to comply with these necessities that we have here in 2020 and also that we have now in 2021. So one particular area of research that we had before the pandemic was in terms of sensors for other particular purposes. But when the pandemic hit, we just needed to put or to translate all these devices into a different application. For instance, we developed this temperature sensor before the pandemic, but when we had the pandemic, we needed to apply to a different device or different application the sensor, and we started developing the thermometer, the temperature corporal monitors. We needed to put together several cells because, as I mentioned before, we need to put these devices into the hospitals very quick. So we needed to assemble all these different groups from CDESI to try to meet all the requirements from mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, all the logistics, all the assembly line, working with all the companies just to start the production for printed circuit boards, also for plastic injection, the assembly lines, and also meet all the regulations that we have in Mexico here with the COFEPRIS, which is the institution that regulate all the medical devices. And just to show you a quick picture of how we assemble all these teams together, we've been working for this, like, I can say that it was more than 70 people working with these different groups. And just a quick video, just to finish real quick, how we started making the sensors. This video is showing you one facility that we have here in CDESI just to make the sensors. These were temperature sensors that we needed to put later together into these assembly lines for printed circuit boards that we partnered with a company here in Mexico City. Then we needed to put together all the molding for plastic injection. We did also the plastic injection with another company here in Mexico, just to end up working with the logistics that allow us to put together all these projects sustainable. And this is how we work closely with the government, with industry, with society to put together all these elements in place and meet all the necessities that we had in 2020. We deliver a production of the ventilators, we deliver a production of the corporal monitor temperature sensors, and we deliver the development of the COVID-19 test here at CDESI. I want to tell you that since we needed to switch gears on what we've been doing or the kind of projects that we attended here in CDESI before the pandemic, right now we are focusing very hard into medical devices. We are partnering with all the hospitals and all the medical institutions that we have here in Mexico just to put together very quick these devices in the hospitals and start developing research, just focus on all the necessities that we have right now that started from the pandemic to 2020. And we put together this national lab that is called ANITEM, where we assembly all these personnel research and development to start working with the medical devices. Just a quick summary, we needed to work very fast to develop the technology. We needed to adapt several groups that what they were doing in the past and what were the necessities that we have right now in 2020. And just to show you a quick example of how we work here as a research and development center as part of the CONICET. Thank you so much for your attention. And if any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mejia, for excellent presentation. It's quite fascinating that the problems that the different countries face are very similar in nature. It's a matter of turning companies and enterprises that formerly did not produce ventilators in companies that may produce ventilators or may allow for temperature monitors and so on. And this has to do with existing capacity in the different countries, not only in the aspect of science, but also in the aspect of technology and how this may serve society at large. Thank you. So again, would like to remind everyone of the Q&A section and to invite Professor Gonzalo Moratorio. He has been suggested by Annie from Uruguay. He's currently the Associate Professor of Virology at the School of Science of the Universidad de la República in Uruguay. Professor Moratorio, the floor is yours.
Okay. Please let me know if you see the full screen mode.
Yes.
Now, full screen.
Yes.
Okay. So first, I would like to thanks for the invitation, and I might misunderstood the idea of presenting here. So I did not base my presentation in different projects and things we have done since the pandemic started in our country, but I did it using the questions that you provide us as a drivers to discuss. And so I would like to start with the first one that said, how can COVID-19 emergency be observed and adapted based on evidence on a large scale? For that, I think that this cartoon represents perfectly what happened. At least was even more pronounced at the beginning of the pandemic. Like at the very beginning, this is the image that I could and I think we all observed about the pandemic, that it was something like, I'm glad it's not my end of the boat that is sinking, but we were all in the same boat. Given said that, I think that at the first moment, this emergency was observed as a movement toward self-determination, that each country has discovered further its fragility, reflected in the dependence on the rest of the world, to satisfy the maintenance of the way of living, and at the same time, the isolation and loneliness when attempting to respond a major shock. It also highlights and deepens the differences between North and South, challenging the multilateral system and global solidarity on an unprecedented scale. But thanks to the progress and to understanding that we were all in the same ship, it also shows how interconnected and interdependent our world has become. Like wasn't a thing of helping you is helping me, and solidarity it's in my self-interest at the international cooperation and multilateralism are back. So global health, I think that will become a key component of national security from now, and not afterthought or a charity project. I think that this is a major concern that all governments and economies will take seriously. And there is no way of tackling the COVID-19 crisis at national level only. So regarding the second driver, like how can health system be designed to be responsive and adaptable and accessible when demanded, I think that development assistance will undergo a process of re-examination and reprioritization in the aftermath of the pandemic and the global recession. I think that traditional development assistance will still be needed to combat poverty and respond to health emergencies, strengthen national health systems, train medical staff, provide vaccines, and, for example, keep combating malnutrition. Promote an approach to sustainability that significantly increases investment in emergency preparedness. I think that more basic services by community health workers and distribution of some prescription drugs over the counter, self-administration of some family planning methods through things like this. I think that COVID-19 has put a greater value on data, research, and epidemiological surveillance or real-time genomics, things regularly used in public health, but now supercharged to inform a pandemic response. I think that the global health community acceptance and use of digital health technologies as health systems around the world are overwhelmed responding to COVID-19. And that part is important because I think that virtuality has impact to do a paradigm change. And I think that sick care will little by little be changed for healthcare. And that's another important issue or point that we have to think if we want to have an accessible and more responsive health system, because we can just prevent for health rather than care during the sickness. So another thing or another driver was how can health system be developed to eliminate inequity and accessing to the services. And I would just tell a small part of our work, but I think that by eliminating different bottlenecks that we have faced, for example, to prevent health system saturation, one thing that happened all over the globe. And given said that, this pandemic showed the weakness of clinical diagnostic infrastructures, underfunded, undervalued, underprepared. Laboratory testing has been overwhelmed by the contagion. So it was a shortage of supplies and reagents. Because of this, we need to move faster and increase our capacities. As Dr. Kalergis said, I mean, no one is gonna come in his presentation to help us at least at the very beginning of the pandemic. And testing capacity determines how many cases a country can confirm. Insufficient testing underreport cases and death. And more importantly, as economies reopen, insufficient testing really control COVID-19 because new virus clusters escape detection and spark new outbreaks. And we knew from the very beginning that the only way to make visible an invisible enemy was the Tetris strategy that we all know very well. So we developed at the very beginning of the pandemic, I'm talking about February 2020, when in the web, they were only 3 protocols available, a very rapid and conventional qPCR test. This could be done by anyone with just basic knowledge of molecular biology. But the important thing was just to convince the policymakers to turn into diagnostic lab scientific institutions, because we have human resources, we have core facilities, we have a lot of resources that we could just redirect in order to start testing. And this is why we created a nationwide SARS-CoV-2 lab diagnosis network with a national test that it was ready in March of 2020, where we know that the same commercial war that we faced for vaccines at the beginning was for the testing capacity. And we did all this without pursuing any profit, any economic profit. We gave everything to the public health sector. And we even trained the people, and we put the people all around public hospitals, all around the country. We share more than 1,000 kilometers of dry border with Brazil, when Brazil was an epicenter of the epidemic. This is why those red flags are kind of bordering our border that we share with Brazil. And this was kind of the success that we had at the 2020, that we ended up that year with less than 100 deaths in the whole country. Of course, Uruguay is a small country. It's 3.5 million people, total population, and it's easier to look or to administer if we compare with Argentina and Brazil. For sure, that is also something that we have to mention. Then policymakers claimed victory before time, and things went a bit wrong during 2021. But then we keep control, like most of the countries, with vaccination programs. But at least we won time, something that we cannot buy. So the other driver was, how should concomitant epidemics be managed, like Zika, COVID-19, flu, diabetes. So I think that here, thinking in intelligent urban settings, thinking in the concept of One Health, right, that recognizes that health of humans, animals, and ecosystems are interconnected. It involves applying a coordinated, collaborative, multidisciplinary, and cross-sectoral approach to address potential or existing risks that originate at the animal-human ecosystem interface. And I think that this, more than ever, has to be studied and has to be in the focus of what we are going to do and how we are going to move. Reimagine health and medicine through biotechnology. We are living the fourth big revolution that is based on artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, and more to come. But this has to be connected with the major advances in biotechnology, like RNA vaccines. RNA vaccines are not going to be only for infectious diseases, are targeting cancer, are targeting other kind of disorders. And I think that this is the way to move. And if we combine, for example, the power that we had in biotechnology tools, settings, with data coming from AI, for example, the mobility, this is one of the papers that we published, in other efforts that we are doing, real-time genomics, and as it has been seen all over the world, the mobility taken by the cell phones, just coupled with the test results, was important to see introductions, to see how viral variants were changing the game. So I think that this is what I wanted to share. There is one last question that I would like to let for the roundtable, that is, how international collaborations be supportive of your research. But I would like just to thank all the institutions here in Uruguay, the University of the Republic, Instituto Pasteur, many other funding agents, like Annie, who suggested my name for this, and of course, all the people involved and the team that I'm working with that made all these efforts possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Moratorio. It's quite interesting aspect that you brought when we compare the population size and the country size of Uruguay with those of neighboring Argentina and Brazil being a major drive of the pandemic at a given time, and having a dry border. It has been really, it should have been, I imagine, a big challenge for you to manage. Thank you. I would like now to invite our guest, which is Professor Cesar Munaico. He was suggested by CONICET-HEC from Peru. And Professor Munaico is the Executive Director of Public Health Surveillance at Centro Nacional de Epidemiología, Prevención y Control de Enfermedades, CDC, Peru. Professor Munaico, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. So I would like to share with you our experience working during the pandemic with not directly related with COVID, but with other diseases. You know, this pandemic, in a different point of view, we need to address as a syndemic, right? Because it's a collapse between the different epidemic, like COVID-19 epidemic and other epidemic like obesity, and this is in the frame of social inequality. And actually, this pandemic has exposed inequality and the lack of policies to address social determinants. And this issue explains how the countries response against this pandemic. This pandemic also have a different kind of impact, have a direct impact on morbidity and mortality, and also have an indirect impact on economics and also on non-COVID diseases. In our country, despite we have a large mortality rate, and also this pandemic has a very deep impact in other diseases not related with COVID. And if we see the pandemic as from the biomedical point of view, we are losing the opportunity to address this pandemic in a better way. So we need to view this pandemic in the framework of social determinants. And you see here in this plot, the health system is a small part of all the factors that are related with the impact on equity and health and well-being of the people in the countries. So we need to address this social determinant which government policies in order to reduce or mitigate the impact of this pandemic and also future pandemic, because this is not the only pandemic that we will have in the future. In the National Center of Epidemiology, we are working hard trying to identify barriers in the response of the health facilities and all the health system as a whole. And we are doing different operational research, trying to understand how these health facilities or the health system work in pandemic time and also before pandemics. And in order to improve this response, as you know, not only here in Peru, the pandemic have a big impact on the health system because many people, many health personnel got sick with this pandemic, and also people with risk factor were not allowed to go to health facilities in order to reduce the exposure to COVID-19. And this has had an impact because pretty much more of the health facilities close their doors, and they couldn't take care of the patient of COVID. We now are focused on trying to understand what was the impact, or what are the impacts of the pandemic in other diseases. For example, as you know, Peru has a very big problem with anemia in children. As you see on the plot on the left, the level of anemia in children under 5 are high. We have almost 40% of prevalence, and this prevalence didn't move along the time. As you see, in 2020, the prevalence stayed at the same level, pretty much 40%. But on the other plot on the right, you see that the iron supplementation went down. Because of that, we have a serious problem with anemia in the near future. So we need to understand how the health system responds in the context of pandemic, because we were focused only in trying to control this pandemic, but we forget the other diseases. Anemia is not the only disease that was affected by this pandemic. We have cancer, for example, non-communicable diseases. These patients lose their appointment and the care sometimes. And we need to try to understand why this happened and what are the barriers to stop the care of people in these health facilities. And we developed various operational research in, for example, in this case, in anemia, and we try to understand how the national plan for reduction and control of maternal and child anemia and chronic child malnutrition in Peru works. And we did different research, a qualitative research and also quantitative research, in order to understand what are the main barriers to the response against anemia. And we found different problems. As you see here, for example, the chief of the health facilities in the primary level, they didn't know about this plan. They didn't plan ahead in how to put the resources in order to accomplish these plan goals. And in the other way, the health personnel didn't know about what are the main activities that support this plan. And also they didn't include budget to support this plan. So this study was measured before the pandemic. As you see, we have a very large program of organization and coordination in these health facilities to address the anemia. But this pandemic worsened this situation. The main problem is that most of the health facilities didn't adapt to this problem. And because of that, we have now a serious problem that we need to face in the next years, in this example with anemia. So, for example, among these problems, we have a problem with timeline of the health facilities, and also waiting times. The mother of these kids has to wait like 2 hours to get care, and we have different problems. And in the context of this pandemic, this problem will worse. Okay, so right now we are working in other operational research, trying to understand how the health system behaves in the context of a pandemic. Try to understand what are the main barriers to accomplish the prevention and control of anemia in children. So right now we are doing qualitative research and also quantitative research to understand this, because we are interested to improve how the health system could respond against this pandemic and in the future pandemic. But we have different challenges. So the main challenges is partnership. We need, as a Minister of Health, we need to partner with other institutions like academic and also private institutions or NGOs in order to get support in terms of get more funding to do this research, and that allow us to be prepared in a better way for the future pandemic. And also we are trying to expand this research to another diseases like cancer or non-communicable diseases, because during the pandemic, the main focus of the country was only in COVID. And in a certain way, we abandoned the other diseases. For example, we have a deep problem with immunization in children. Okay, the national coverage went down and put us in a real risk to reintroduce other diseases like polio or sarampion or measles. So because of that, we need to not focus only in doing research in COVID, but we need to focus to understand what happened in the context of pandemic with other diseases. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Monaco, for sharing your perspectives. And it's clear that implementation science is a critical topic that we all face. And again, the COVID challenge has brought even a greater light to this perspective. I would like now to invite our guest, which was suggested by the National Institutes of Health in the United States, which is Professor Felipe Fragni. He is an associate professor of epidemiology at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and an associate professor of PMR at Harvard Medical School. Felipe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Mello. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me share here my screen. Oh, I'm sorry for that. Let me just turn this off if I was off. Let me just share here quickly. Okay. Oh, this continues. Okay, sorry for that. So what I wanted to, again, thank you very much for the invitation. What I wanted to discuss today in these 8 minutes, and I'll try to be quick. I know the time, we're running out of time. So what I wanted to discuss is something that I've been developing in collaboration. That project, as you all know, I'm from Brazil. I was trained in Brazil and moved to US. I've been here about 20 years. And that's a project that we created with the goal of enhancing clinical research training. So I was discussing with my colleagues from the University of São Paulo in Brazil, and it's interesting. The same colleagues that now we have this FAPESP grant in collaboration with Professor Namara, Professor Mati Mamura. And we're discussing this again, back then in 2006, 2007, I was in Boston and we're discussing, look, how can we develop a training program in collaboration that would have a long-term impact? You know, there's a lot of courses, there's a lot of training programs to train researchers, but it's difficult to do something in collaboration that has a long-term impact. You can do a course, you can do a webinar, you can do different things. At that point, also in 2006-07, the online technologies were much less developed than we have now. But what I wanted to show is the project that we developed that has grown significantly. Most of the countries in Latin America, we have at least one site. And I wanted just to present some of our successes and some of our challenges for the future as well, and how, again, we like to think that that's helping to develop, at least helping to contribute with training of clinical researchers. So quickly, what's the main motivation? I think it's obvious, and I don't need to discuss too much on that. Again, we all know that evidence-based medicine is important. For again, healthcare personnel, even if they are not researchers, they should have at least a basic training, should be able to apply what the evidence that is generated in research in clinical practice. But it's still there is, and we've seen with this pandemic as well, the gap in terms of being able to critically analyze the evidence from the literature. And that's a big problem. And it's interesting that even before this pandemic, there was an epidemic in the United States that was even worse, not worse, sorry. At that point was the most important again, epidemic, which was the opioid epidemic. And opioid epidemic, it is clearly a result of an evidence using poorly. Okay, so, and again, just making. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you share to presentation mode?
Thank you. Of course. I just realized now. Oops. Okay, perfect. And then again, just making this long story short, as you know, so the prescription of opioid opioids in US was increasing significantly. Was almost an exponential increase, and there was a little bit of decrease in the last 1 or 2 years when that problem started to be addressed. But if you go to the origin of this, if you go to the main cause of this problem, you go back again to the wrong use of evidence, to the wrong interpretation of evidence. And you go back to, if you trace back, you go back to this paper here, published in 1985. It was just a series of cases, of 38 cases, showing that opioids can be used in non-malignant pain, no cancer pain in the chronic setting, which is exactly what leads to dependence, to tolerance, and it helped a lot to result in this crisis of opioid use with deaths, addiction, and so on. So again, that's a classical example of the evidence not being used correctly by clinicians and not also being adequately produced. So, and one thing that's important, again, what happens when EBM is ignored, you see a lot of crises, the opioid crisis, there's a historical crisis as well in the past, historical problems. And it's interesting, the COVID, we've seen as well some discussions that it was caused also because of the challenges for interpreting the evidence. And one thing that's important, you all know that it's not black and white, meaning that, again, it's if you go back and if you read any paper, there's also a amount of biases. You can't, it's even if you do a perfect randomized clinical trial, it's still possible. So your sample is not randomly selected. So your sampling method is a convenience sampling, for instance. That's one example. Even a perfect randomized clinical trial. So there's always a degree of biases. But we need to understand that, and that's the issue that's difficult, and also how to design this study. So based on that, and discussing initially with colleagues from USP in São Paulo, we decided, look, let's create this program, this clinical research training program. The idea is to do this in collaboration between faculty at Harvard and the colleagues in Brazil. And we started this in a pilot program in 2008. It was just one site, and the program has grown significantly. Now that's all the sites here. So in South America, I think the only country we don't have a sites in Bolivia and Venezuela and the Iguanas here. And then we have sites in Central America as well. So we grew quite quickly in this past 14 years of the program. We have several cities as well being represented. Again, a large number of students. And one thing, and I know my time is coming to the end, but one thing that's interesting is that we want the students during the program to develop collaboration. That's the most important thing. We just don't want to give the content for the student. That's not the only goal. getting the count that you can buy a book. We want them to collaborate, to learn with each other, so they can, you know, after the program. So our thinking is, how can we increase this collaboration after the program is ended? And that's why we developed a journal, a PPCR journal. It's an international peer-reviewed journal that the students can submit their projects to be published, and other initiatives as well. And just to conclude here, these last two slides, again, our goal is to try to enhance this collaboration after the program. This is a 9-month program, and we want them. We know it's difficult. I visit most of the sites in some of the cities. You know, some of the hospitals, they don't have the ethics committee set up yet, and there's only 1 or 2 labs there. But again, we think that by exposing them to different places, exposing them, they develop a real life project that can help them to start learning the basics and start practicing and then contributing as well. But it's still, again, that's my last slide. It's still, there's important questions to address. How to increase the reach of the program even more, but given it still has costs, we try to keep it as minimal as possible, and how to measure the long-term impact of the program. With that, again, I want to thank again Professor Mello and the organizers of this conference, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fragni. It's quite of importance for us to, let's say, have the same level of understanding of what the clinical practice of research should be, and what different institutions and organizations, not only the ethics board, but also internal review boards and so on. And to have this standardized across the globe, it's quite of relevance, because otherwise we would have studies which are meaningless. And so thank you again for your contribution. I would like now to invite our last but not least speaker, which is Professor Silvia Cohen. She was suggested by CONICET from Argentina, and she's a principal researcher at CONICET, adjunct professor of neurology at Faculty of Medicine at University of Buenos Aires. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. I share my presentation. Sorry. Could you see?
It's entering.
Yes?
It's coming. It's still blank, but it is coming, as it seems.
Sorry, I am researcher, it's true, but I am director of documentary film. So I share with you a documentary film, and I made in the last year during the first wave of the epidemic, and I share only 2 minutes because I think it's a very good reflex of what is the engage of the health professional in this time.
Familia con 4 hijos, tengo 3 perros, digamos, es propio de Citibel tener muchos hijos y muchos perros. Estamos pasando, digamos, por esta pandemia desde marzo, que estamos trabajando en forma constante y en forma continua.
Vivo hace una semana me mudé con mi novio, vivía con mis papás hasta hace muy poquito, ahora logré la independencia en ese sentido, a pesar de la pandemia en la que estamos.
Como que, haces terapia intensiva y ahora es como que, wow, ¿qué haces? ¿Y cómo es? Y que como que la gente, ya no tanto, pero al principio sí le interesaba un poco de que...
Sorry, Professor Silvia, could you share again?
Sorry?
The presentation was only with audio.
You can listen.
Yes, we're just listening. There was no video, no image.
You can see the video.
Silvia, no podemos ver el video, pero además el audio se escucha más o menos. Yo te recomiendo que cuando pongas compartir pantalla, te fijes que hay una opción abajo que dice compartir el sonido o compartir el sonido de mi equipo, algo por el estilo. Si lo cliqueas, el sonido se va a compartir mucho mejor.
A ver, voy a intentar.
Que se trataba lo que hacías.
Ahora se ve el video.
Y no se ve el sonido.
Y los únicos que...
Sí, se escucha mal, pero se escucha.
Sacaban sangre o le hacían las cosas éramos nosotros. Hasta que llegó un momento en el que nos empezamos a contagiar. La mayoría de mis compañeras se contagiaron. Y hubo un momento en el que, una semana más o menos, ninguna podía venir a trabajar porque estábamos todas.
Sorry. Well, it's okay. Sorry. My idea is share, but if you want, after I can pass the link because it's free, and I'm going to translate in English, in the YouTube, in my channel of YouTube, and also in Vimeo, so you can see. I share with you our experience because I am neuroscience, but I decide because I work in the Buenos Aires in a very poor area. And I decide that is in Argentina, that is Buenos Aires, when they live 2 million people. I decide involved in the pandemic, and we created a network, and we identified at first that is the head, that is my hospital, Hospital El Cruce, Néstor Kirchner. This photo is a part of our team. And we decided to be the head of this network. And well, our work is one of the papers the last year. But we identified one of the main problems. It was the lack at the beginning of the pandemic, the lack of information from and between the different health centers. So in relation to the question you give us, we decide in this time to create a special epidemiological dashboard with it's an open source, and the other characteristic very important, it was able to see for everybody, from the health secretary, from the director of hospital, but for each professional health who works in each center. So everybody could see what happened in their own hospital, but also what happened in the other hospital. We have with different window. It's not online, but we can see update two times by day, in the morning and in the afternoon. And here you can say the 16 hospitals we have in the network. And we decide to put red is the patient in a different area in ET, in clinical general. With red is the patient with COVID. In green is the bed free, and the other pathologies. And in 1 second, you can see what is the situation in one time. It was very useful because everybody knows 1 point always is we haven't more bed, inclusive when we have. It was very useful, not only for the pandemics, if no, now also, no? And after we can, to make the reference geographic, for example, here you can see some hospital, well, it's Argentina, we have a very name with the political, for example, Evita, for Evita, the name of the hospital is Evita Pueblo, and you can see here in the map, what is the area, the connection in this network. And also here, you can see, also in less 1 second, how many patients in person we have with COVID or another pathologies. And when each professional head can touch here, very quickly can, for example, in this hospital, he touched in red, and he said he knows there are 5 patients with COVID diagnosis, and also it's the same for each. For example, he touched in green, he knows there are in the area, the critical is in the intensive therapy, there are 6 bed free. That was very, very useful, in special in the pandemic time. But it's now also because we can change the etiquette, the name, so we can continue to use this framework. Well, after we continue, and 1 month after began the pandemic, we work with what happened with each patient. And each patient, we can see it is a man, it's a woman, which is the age, and with the different icons, it is dangerous, their situation or no. And we continue, and I think 2 months after, we can arrive to the information with the because we decide to make very sample data to fill out very quickly. So it is the risk, the social risk, the clinical risk, which is the data at the start, the hospitalized, if there are or not disease pre-existent, and the system have for the security question an ID automatic, and also they can estimate it when the patient discharged, how many days he stayed hospitalized, and we put also the sex, the age. I saw another question we think was very important. It was in relation to the availability of beds. How do you see here? There was a very important increase of in special in E2. We couldn't, at the first to the pandemic, after the end of first wave, we can arrive to increase the 133% of the number of bed. Sorry, is the same situation in the clinical service. It was very important because we can give answer at all the patients. I didn't see, but all this work, all our work is referring to the public hospital. We have another clinical private, but we work in special with the public hospital. It's meaning in Argentina, nobody pay to be hospitalized. Well, I guess like in the much country of Latin America, Argentina continues to have a poverty remains, is in order to current person, and the extreme poverty, it is in order to 10.5%. So the pandemic is arriving in Argentina in a not very good time. In our network, in the Southeast network, the socioeconomic situation is even worse, especially in the care of vulnerable patients. For that, we very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic, we pay attention in the increase of the available bed. Well, as the conclusion, the strategy that we use in our experience, in particular, the increase in the availability of the number of available hospital beds and human and technical resources since the beginning of the pandemic result essential in order to respond to the serious health situation. We consider that may be useful for other regions with similar socio-economic conditions. Now we organize since is a proportion of from PAHO and served for post-COVID-19 effects. Only now with the patient hospitalized immunity. We have not time because it's finished. Only I show you, we have 1,100 patients. Only 2 people, they refuse to answer. Well, in the next meeting, or maybe we write a paper, we told you about what is the situation of this patient, because we have not analyzed, we have not the time to analyze this information. No? And for finish, I took this question, and we think it is important to the financing project that contribute to the equity in health with a gender perspective. We think it's very important the role of the women as a worker, but always as the role of the caregiver in this pandemic. It is always, but it's very, very clear. For that, we think it's very important to include this perspective, and also to consider the regional and local economical, cultural, and social characteristics. Sorry. Well, the before colleague spoke about the importance of establishing collaboration networks. Also, we think it's very important generating program open source, because if not, they are very expensive, the other program, and we can share it. And we think it is very important the South-South human resource training, because we are more close, because it's easier for the language question, and because we have the human resource very qualified, and we can give good training. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cohen, and thank you all for participating on this event. I think the topics, the issues that Professor Cohen has brought, again, resonate with a number of topics that were mentioned in the previous presentations. Just before moving to the questions, I would like, for those that may need to depart, I would like to thank you for your participation and for your contribution on this event, being either a speaker or as a guest, and likely contributing to expanding this discussion. For those of you who may remain with us for some 10 or 15 minutes more for questions, I'd like to pose a question to all of the speakers, which is, what do you think may be the role of regional collaboration, as Professor Cohen has mentioned, in research in facing a crisis like the COVID pandemic? And what type of mechanism could the funding agencies in the Americas region put in place to ensure that such collaboration could happen quickly, South, Central, and North America, of course? So who would like to help with that? Moratorio?
Okay, so I think that funding is an important issue in Latin America, mostly. Is not enough, is clearly not enough, but I do think that all efforts that we have done with many countries in the region were key to navigate this crisis. For example, thanks to collaborations that we had with different virologists, for example, from Argentina, the Andrea Gamarnik's group, we were able to start our own serological kits to start looking at the prevalence. Before that, being connected with the world, with the US and many other parts in Europe, we were able, at least in the case of Uruguay, to move in advance, to anticipate what is going to happen, because the pandemic started in the opposite side of the world, and in the south cone, we were one of the last regions to be hit by the pandemic. We had to take that advantage. We had to start learning from what was happening in Italy, in Spain. Maybe at the very beginning in China, information was not easy to obtain, but then that was something that I think that through collaborations, we could have done it better. And again, I think that there is a need to have regional projects like there are in Europe, in the European Research Council, ERC projects, or projects that Canada or the US, they have. For example, the US with NIH, that they provide real funding to start doing basic science and important science to move through all these topics.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Would you like to comment on research collaboration, Professor Jimenez de Samudio?
Yes, we agree with Dr. Oratorio from Uruguay. It is very important to create the networks in between Latin America to generate our own data. I think the world is talking a lot about Delta, for example, variants, but we do not have a lot of information about, for example, Delta or Manaus variant, which is the one that affected us the most. So thank you very much for the opportunity of this meeting, and look forward to more meetings in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angelica. Professor Kalergis?
Yes, thank you very much. I just like to thank you for the invitation. And before referring to the question, I'd like to let you know I need to move to another Zoom. That was starting in a couple of minutes. I think so. 2 nights ago, I was in a big meeting with all the countries from Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of vaccine manufacturing and the source of the access to vaccines. And clearly, the interactions between Latin American countries, I think, is very, very important. Someone mentioned in one of the talks how important was the training. I also agree with Professor Moderator in terms of having these program grants in the region that are equivalent to what other countries and regions do, like Europe, US, and Canada. So I think there are many goals to be achieved in terms of promoting the interaction of American scientific agencies. For example, the regulatory agencies that oversee the use of drugs and vaccines, they were connected during the pandemic. That was very important. So, for example, when an agency like in Brazil or in Colombia or in Mexico or in Uruguay, they approve, or in Chile, they approve a vaccine, everybody's looking at sharing some of those discussions, or that approval could be useful for other countries. Likewise, I think the funding agencies should promote initiatives like the one that we present now, because those initiatives just sort of underscore the common goals and the common interests that we share
And I think the collaboration between scientists in the region is very, very important to tackle the problems that affect us. We have many more similarities than differences, and we need to exploit that and between the Latin American countries. And the funding agencies can promote that by means of programs that could reinforce the interaction between scientists from different countries.
Thank you, Alexis. I do agree, and I would like to advance that this meeting has been of relevance to me in the sense of bringing forward this suggestion of strengthening our collaborations, which we're already doing at FAPESP, but of course, meetings such as this may further stress this need. I would like to hear from Professor Fragni, giving his experiencing of this 450 students in each round of training. What has been your experiencing in terms of bringing up collaborations between participants among or from different countries?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So that's our goal. So it's interesting in the. Oops, sorry. Every time I talk, there's someone calling. There is two things that I see is that the we try to make the training as oh my gosh, sorry. We try to make the training as real life as possible. And that's one thing that's important. We try not to give the theory. We are not interested that they just learn what is a t-test, what is a ANOVA, and how to design a randomized clinical trial. We are interested that they truly learn something that is real, so something that can apply. So that's why we give them challenges for them to develop during the 9 months. It's a real project. So some of them, they do develop. So we see that during the program, they wanted to do a collaboration between Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, a multi-center clinical trial. But the difficult part is what's being discussed, is funding for doing the project. I think that's and of course you need an institution. You need they need to get in collaboration with someone a little bit more senior as well. Some of them, they're just in the beginning stages of their training. But I think at least we see that that provides them a platform, provides them a bit exposure as well, and provides them a little bit of knowledge as well. So that's one thing that we see as you know, it's interesting, before running this program, I knew very little about research in Argentina, in Ecuador, in Colombia, and after that I learned much more. And I think that's one thing that's important, and conferences like this as well helps a lot to learn about. I think that's in the way I see, and I agree. I think the funding is what connects us. So every cycle of NIH, I've been submitting grants. Most of these grants, actually, recently I've submitted in collaboration with institutions in Brazil. We do a 2-site center. It's still a little bit difficult as well to get these grants. It seems there is a little bit bias of getting projects that is only here in US, but we try to make the argument, and we're trying to get these funds. But I think I agree. The main problem is funding, but I think the program, the way I see the contribution is to expose them to these different countries. We've seen as well. So one thing that we've seen, some participants from Colombia, they started to get training in Brazil, PhD programs, and those type of exposure. That's what also helps to develop further collaboration. As first you need to connect these people, and of course you need funding. But I think the program I see as a big connection, and of course teaching them the basics of clinical research. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Felipe. We're now 17 minutes past our allotted time. if Sylvia, Cesar, or Israel, of those, and André, of those speakers who have been participating in this event would not have any pending comment, I would like then to move to conclusion. So, yeah, I don't see Sylvia.
Yes, no, I agree with everybody. I think I have not more new ideas. Yes, I guess than the dramatic situation that everybody lives, we show with ourselves, but also for all the world, that in Latin America, we could, in general, give an answer, and especially with the public health system. I thought before the pandemic, and I think in Argentina, I know very well in Brazil, the situation is not the same, inclusive in Chile, neither. Peru is more or less, but Uruguay, yes. We have a very strong health system, the public health system. When I talk about Brazil, no, not now, but Brazil have a very strong health system. And we have not very good, in general, we are not very good received by the mass media, because the mass media give very, very marketing for the private system in relation to health. I guess not only in Latin America, also in Europe, no? For example, in Italy, when it was almost destroyed, the health system public, and in the north of Italy, there are many papers about it. And the result, it was a disaster at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think it is very important to support the public health system, to support the research, to the research must work with the assistant, and also the activity, the education. I think we have 3 questions, very, very important to can give a good answer in front of this pandemic or in general.
Thank you, Sylvia. I would like to conclude by thanking the Global Research Council, ANID from Chile, CONICET from Paraguay, CONICET from Argentina, and UNCIRC from Canada, as well as FAPESP from Brazil, and also our colleagues that joined us from Mexico, Peru, the United States, and Uruguay. I think I mentioned all of the contributing countries, as well as the organizing agencies that have made this event possible. I would like also to thank the audience for participating for this up to this time, even some 20 minutes after what it was originally scheduled. I would like to ask all of the speakers to still remain connected as the live transmission is terminated. And once again, thank you all, and looking forward to see you in November for the next 2 meetings that we'll have on this series. Thank you all.
Thank you.